Hello and welcome to another tutorial. So this time round we're going to be taking a look at custom editor windows. So these are windows that we can create in the editor, and they could be for extra debugging stuff that we might be doing, for accompanying stuff in a scene. They could give us ways of then sort of also interacting with our data, so allowing us to, rather than just select an object, edit it in the inspector, then we could be editing stuff in its own dedicated window that's only presenting the key things we need. So we're going to take a bit of a look at how to work with editor windows and some of the kinds of things we can be doing there with them. So what I've done is I've set up just a fairly basic scene to begin with. This scene just has a few objects in it that they all have the same script on them and they're all moving around. So what I want to do first is show you setting up an editor window where what it's able to do is be aware of these objects in the scene and be able to be sort of getting additional information from those objects. So because we're creating an editor window, so it's something that only exists in the editor, we have to make sure this code goes into a folder called editor. This is really important if you have any non-editor or any editor code that it's trying to compile into a build that actually will fail. Sometimes we have scripts that need to be there at runtime but have specific bits of logic that only exist for when in the editor, and we can handle that, and that's something we'll likely be encountering with this stuff today. So I'm going to create a script here. So for these, the script on those is just called demo object. So what I'm going to do is have a demo object editor window. Now, the naming of that is really just for our purposes, but that's just gives us a nice clear name for it. So when we're setting up an editor window, this, firstly, obviously we need to have using Unity editor, and this inherits from editor window. So we need to create a way for this to be shown, for it to be made visible. So what we can do with that is we can set up a public static void show window. Now, for this function to be run, we need to provide an attribute for it. So we would say menu item, and we can, so with this, if you want to group it, say under the actual existing menu, you put the name of the existing menu and then a / that allows you to group ones. Or we could have our own standalone one. So this could then be debug demo objects. So it just gives it a way of being able to find it. And then we do editor window, and we can tell it to, we say get window. Get window, we can provide the type. And what that will do is that will actually show a particular window. Now for doing the drawing, we do that similar to what we would do with a custom inspector, things like that. We have an on GUI. And then with this, the way we draw things in here, again, very similar to what we would do for an inspector. So let's just draw some basic stuff first. So let's just draw a GUI layout, and let's draw a label, est label. So we just want to make sure that the window is something that we can select. So we should see the menu appear up the top, and we can. We get debug. Then I can go demo objects, and we've got the window and test label appears, which is great. That's what we're after. So what I want to do is I want to make it so that this window doesn't really do anything except when we're playing. So we want to actually detect if the editor is in play mode. So we can do that. So are we currently playing? Currently playing. So I can say F application is playing, and if it is, or actually in this case what I'll do is if it's not playing, I'll output stuff. So I'll say if it's not playing, Then we'll display a message, so we can say only available in play mode. So that's good. And we early out so we don't get too deep a nested hierarchy there, which is good. So then we want to look at being able to have this actually display those demo objects. So we've got a few different ways that we could go about this. We could cache that information, we could have it tied to things that are selected, stuff like that. So we've got a few different options there. So let's set this up initially where what it's going to do is it's just going to go through all of those particular objects. Now things could be getting created and destroyed and stuff like that. So that means, you know, we could be doing a search, we could then cache stuff. There's a lot of different options there, but those are all potentially quite slow. So if we're going to have it where we're dealing with dynamic things, they're getting created, destroyed, potentially, what I would generally do in a case like of this is I would set up essentially a helper. So I would create an empty object. So demo object debug interface. And we'll create a script for that. So we can say demo object debug interface. So this way we have an object in the scene that the purpose of that object is going to be to allow us to easily debug things. So I'm going to make it that this is a singleton. So we'll have public static, and we'll just correct the naming of that. Again, have that linked up the way we ideally want. Then I'm going to have a void awake. We do want to set the instance, but we also want to check if the instance is not equal to null. Because if it's not equal to null, then what I want to do is the usual safety logic we would, where we destroy the game object that this is attached to, and where what we do is we also output an error message, just so that we can be clear that something has gone wrong. So demo object debug interface already exists, destroying, and then we just output the game object name. Just makes it clear what's happening. So that's good, because then what we can do is, okay, well in the editor window here, we could then do another check. We could say, well, okay, can I access that? So if that is equal to null, then again, we're going to do a return, and we'll say GUI layout, label, no demo object in scene. So it just makes it clear we can easily see that the debug interface is not present. Debug interface present. And I can test that if I remove this and we make sure we've got all of our errors cleared. So remove that from the scene. Then when I go and take a look at the window, only available in play mode, which is good. So I go to play, and then it's giving me the updated error, which is great. Whereas if I add that back in and then play, then what we'll see is we get nothing appearing, which is correct because we're not actually displaying anything at the moment. So what I would then be able to do with this debug interface is I could have it maintain a list of our demo objects. And this could be all demo objects. You can create it like that. we would have that again be another one where it is public get private set. And we would also then set up a couple of interfaces for registering and deregistering. So register, demo object, other, and then a void deregister. And that's going to be all demo objects, remove, and other. So that's good, because then what the demo objects can do is in start, they can say demo object debug interface, instance, register, and themselves, and then in on destroy, they can then go same thing, dot deregister this, if that exists. So it might be that that doesn't. And we'd also put that here. So we want to make this code so that it's safe for whether it is running when we've got that debug interface or not. So handy. We could even actually instantiate this interface at runtime. That would be something that we could absolutely do. So with that, okay, we can then display data for each of those objects. So that's a good starting point. But we could also check first, do we actually have any? And then we can see all demo objects. So if that count is 0, then similar to with these other ones, we can output an error message. So no demo object in scene. And return no demo objects. So this means we're properly keeping track of whether the stuff's there. And then finally, we'll actually display the stuff for those. So it's going to be running quite often. So I'm going to say that we'll use a classic for loop. So index is less than demo object. And that looks good. So then we can grab the object. So var demo object is equal to, and we just go grab all of the rest of this. So that's good, we've got the object. So we're going to display the name for each one. So we're just going to output GUI label, label, and then we'll say, we could put the index there as well, would be a useful thing. So let's put index +1, so it starts at 1. And then we can just put demo object dot name. And what this should mean is when we go and actually run it, we will see in our object editor window here that we'll get a list of the particular ones appearing. And we do, which is great. What if we want extra information there though? What if we want them to show a bunch of detailed data? That would be pretty cool. So we can do that. And one of the things that we can in particular do is be querying those objects for debug information. So we could actually say, well, GUI layout, label, and then we just go, hey, demo object, get debug info. And then we go to our demo object, and this is a case of where I would wrap something in F Unity editor. So this is going to mean that this particular code will only exist in the editor, which is good, allows us to have stuff that's sort of lower level or might use editor specific functions, and it's not going to end up in a build. So this would then be public void and get debug info. Actually, it's not void, it's a string. So for then constructing this string, so I could say, okay, well, it's going to be, let's put out the position. and that's an easy one to grab. So transform position. Let's also have it on a new line, which we can very easily add in a new line. Always recommend using the system environment new line for stuff like this. It's going to make it a lot easier and cleaner, and also works sort of cross-platform. So then we could also have progress and bounce progress. So that looks good. That should output that info. Let's take a look at how it looks. Make sure it's looking, a way that we're happy with. So, we can see the data there. A couple of things we notice, it's changing pretty infrequently. And that's an important thing. These don't actually update that frequently. We can trick it and make it update more frequently, but we definitely see these are not updating frequently. It would also be nice to have these indented. So, firstly, solving the update aspect. So there's a couple of different ways that we can go about solving this. One of the options is we can have an on-inspector update, which that's updated 10 times a second. We can then go, hey, repaint. There's other ones that will update even more frequently, but on-inspector update is usually sufficient. We don't need to usually go much faster than that. But this way it will be 10 times a second refreshing, and we can see immediately it's updating more. One of the things we want to keep in mind though is the more this is refreshing, the more overhead it has. So you do want to be a little bit cautious with stuff like that. Then we wanted a bit of indenting. So if we want to indent this, then there's a couple of things we can do to achieve that. So one of the things that we can do is we can set this up and we can say, okay, well, using new GUI layout horizontal scope, and we'll bring these into this. And then what we do is we've got our first label here. And then actually we'll move that up here because then what we would do is do a spacer here. So we can say GUI layout space, and I don't want it to indent too much, probably just like 10 is enough. And then we can say, well, using a new GUI layout vertical scope, then we can bring this label into there. So we're just setting up a bit of grouping there for this. And so let's test this out. So with that, we're able to indent those nicely, which is good. What if we ended up with a lot more of these things though? Because we've only got the 3. If I chuck in a lot more, enough so that it'll take up more space than we have in this window. So what we'll notice is, well, it's taking up more space, but I can't scroll. So that's something where if we want to be able to scroll, we have to actually do some specific stuff for that. And what you'll see is you can do begin. And we have a couple of different things. We obviously have begin horizontal and vertical for setting up specific ones in terms of sections of controls that are grouped. But in this case, we can just do a begin scroll view. So this needs a scroll position. And what I'm going to do is create a variable up here. It's going to be a vector2 scroll position. And so we would say scroll position is equal to, we begin the scroll view. We can give it style information there, things like that if we want to. There's other options that we've got in terms of different layout things, stuff like that. We can control, does it always show the horizontal? Does it always show the vertical options? So we've got quite a few different controls there. And then we need to make sure we do an end scroll view. Really important. A lot of these GUI things do have begin and end blocks. If they do have a begin and end, do make sure that you are setting those. So, okay, we've just done begin scroll view. We've done the basic version of that there. So let's see what happens when we run that. So we can see runs, and we have our scroll bar. So pretty straightforward for adding the things in, but it means then that it can update in terms of size, stuff like that, which is great. So in this case, we are display all demo objects. So that's pretty cool. And let's look at what other controls we've got, because we've used a few things in GUI layout, but there's going to be other controls that we've got access to as well. So we can see GUI layout, because what could be good is if we could collapse these. So if we want to set this up so we've got these objects are able to be collapsed, things like that, then what we can do is we can use an editor GUI layout. And with that, we have things like these fold-out header groups. Now, the fold-out header groups need to be keeping track of if it's expanded. So is expanded. And we can provide stuff with those like the actual name or the text. So we'd move the label into that. And then we need to be updating this is expanded, which we'll get to where we get that from in a moment. So, okay, we're drawing the bits of information there. What we then also need to do, again, much like with the other ones where we've got to begin, there has to be an editor, GUI layout, and an end for that, just so that it works correctly. So the is expanded. This needs to tie to this particular demo object. So it needs to be something that the demo object itself is actually keeping track of. So what I'm going to do is change this like that. So demo object. And again, this is something where what I would do is set this up here as an F Unity editor and if public bool is expanded. And in this case, I'm going to allow anything to set that. So it just means that being Unity editor, it's only going to be accessible within it. But what that means is we can track stuff within the object. And so we can see that's not actually working properly. So what we then also need to do is we need to actually be using this as expanded. So we need to actually check if is expanded. Then we're able to run this logic. So we only want to do this if we're currently expanded. Otherwise, we shouldn't be displaying any of it. But we still, regardless, you always need that end for their header group. So we're going to go ahead and run this. You can see everything's collapsed, which is good. We expand it, and we can see the data, and the data is there and properly being updated rapidly, which is cool. So, okay, we've got the ability to show information there. That amount is going to handle, as we scale up the number of things, which is great. We don't really have any interactivity with this stuff yet, though. Like, there are things exist there, but we don't really have anything actually interacting. It'd be kind of nice if we could click on stuff and then it would actually, change. That would be pretty cool. Or, if we could click on something to actually select the particular object, that would be really cool. So what I could do is look at, we could see what does GUI layout have. So some stuff is going to be in both. So GUI layout for the button, that gives us a few options. So we do have ones for just text, stuff like that. So we could have select in hierarchy, and we just wrap that in an if. So object selected, or object selection requested would be a better term for that. Requested. So in that case, what we would be able to do is there's actually this thing called selection, and selection has a lot of different elements in it. Like it has a lot. So we can see we've got stuff like, okay, the game object that's shown in the inspector. We can, there's honestly so many different things because we've got active game object. There's also active object, which active object is, handles not just stuff that's selected in the hierarchy, but also things like if you selected a prefab or material, stuff like that. You've got a lot of different ones there. It's really quite a lot of particular ones that we could actually be adjusting and updating here. So that selection thing is also something you can use if you are needing to actually process stuff that's particularly selected. So that's something where, okay, we're going to go for the active game object is equal to demo object dot game object, and for good measure, let's also indicate if this is selected currently. So is selected will be, we need to check, there's a couple of things that it could be part of. So if we take a look at selection, you actually can say, well, selection, do you contain a particular instance ID? So we would, in this case, need to check demo object, and we can get the instance ID. So that will check if our particular one is selected. Because what we could then do is we could be modifying the style of stuff like that as well. We could also be, having an extra indicator here. So we could do something like this, where what I want to do is essentially if it's selected, then put in an asterisk, otherwise nothing. So that's something I could easily group that. And I could actually change that so it's just using a single character. And that would then end up going here like this. That'll just output that extra little bit of info so that we can, and it might be grumpy because it's, okay, so we might need to go for string just so that it's happy, which is fine. Just allows us to indicate whether it's selected or not. So let's check and see how this looks. So we've got nothing selected at the moment. If I select sphere, so nothing is highlighting there. Let's go with sphere here. I can say select in hierarchy, which it does do, but we don't get an update there. So what it potentially is because I asked for the instance ID of the demo object, not the game object that it is attached to. Because strictly, what I have selected is actually not that object, is not that script. What I have selected is the game object, and that script is one of the things on that. So we can see sphere is selected, and now I get the asterisk. And as I change different ones, that changes. So if I have cube there, and we could even be a little bit more clever, and we only display this button if it is not already selected. So if not is selected, and that, so that's pretty good. Show show full info, check F selected. So what that will mean is we don't get that button there, except in the case where we have it actually already not selected. So cylinder will have the button, sphere will have that button, cube will not. I go and select the cylinder and it disappears. So now we've got something where our editor window is able to talk to objects in the scene. And we can have that cross communication. They're not just displaying information, but it could also be pushing information to them. So we could set up stuff where they might do things like, resetting their position, a whole bunch of things. So let's set up, so we have, a new horizontal scope, GUI layout, horizontal scope. And what we're going to do is, this is something where, because one of the buttons is potentially not there, I want to make it that the button that is always there is going to be something that is drawn first. Just because muscle memory, people will get used to where something is placed, so you want to be very careful about the order that you place these in. So F GUI layout dot button, and then this might be go slower, and we'll then have another one which will be go faster. And I just want to check and see how these are looking first before I write all of the code for them, just in case there's other changes I need to make. So we can see go slower, go faster. And these ones, it's split further. And again, I know things will be a consistent location for where things will be, which is cool. So for go slower, well, what that's going to do is go demo object, go slower. And again, these would be things that I would make only available in the inspector, in the editor. Go faster. So we can set up here, we'll have a public void go faster, and a similar one for go slower. So that will work. And what we can do is, if we've said go slower, then bounce interval, we're going to increase it by, let's say 50%. Or maybe we make it, 50% I think will be good. So we times it by 1.5. That will mean that it takes a lot longer. If we've said go faster, then I want to reduce it by half. So that will mean it has to complete that interval in a lot less time. So let's test this. So it's running. So we'll focus on the cylinder first. So with the cylinder, I'm going to say go faster. We can see it's moving faster. So it makes it, we could have very easy controls here for, you could pause movement, stuff like that. If I went for the cube, I could tell the cube to slow way, way, way down. So it's going to move, but it's moving really, really slowly. So this gives us ways of not just being able to view data of things in the scene there, but also being able to control them. And it means we don't need to necessarily have stuff exposed in the inspector. You can also imagine, if this is, you've got all of a particular set of object here, you can have a whole panel of controls and just very quickly go through and go, okay, freeze this one, let this one run. Lots of different changes you could easily make. And it's all nicely presented in the one window. So it can really speed up things like our debugging processes there, which is going to allow us to solve things quicker and focus more time on actually continuing to build, polish the games that we're making, which is cool. That's what we want to be able to do. So we've got our editor window. There's a couple of final little sort of improvements we can make to this. So when we create the window, we can do a couple of extra little bits. So if we take a look, this actually returns our window, because then we can go, well, window, and we can adjust things there. So we could be controlling stuff like size, stuff like of that. We also can be changing the title. So title is not the one we want to use. That's actually deprecated. The one we want to use is title content. So that we can say that that is going to be, so we want to have this be demo object debugger, but we can't just go and set it to a string like of that. We actually have to go for a new GUI content. And with GUI content, we've got a bunch of different overrides here. And one of the things we can do is just provide text. So we'll run that. Now, we've already shown the window there. So we need to have closed it. We'll go and open this, and we can see we've got the updated name now. So that means we can have proper name there for it, which is cool. There's other things that we could actually then be doing as well. So when we're displaying these particular ones, because we're displaying a bunch of information there, what could be good is having a bit more sort of spacing between them would be handy. So we can again take a look and see, okay, it's always good to check both GUI layout and end GUI layout to see the kinds of things, sorry, editor GUI layout to see the things that we've potentially got there available to us. So yeah, we've got a lot of things like text fields, buttons, stuff like of that. If we go to editor GUI layout, there will be a couple of different ones that we will potentially have. So there's usually, you'll have stuff like specific fields for doubles, you'll have drop-down menus, stuff like of that. Will appear with this, your gradient boxes, so a lot of different ones that are available in the editor GUI layout. And one of the ones is a separator. So if we add in a separator here, and we're only going to add this if index is greater than 0. And then we'll run this just to see how that looks. So what we're wanting is something to be breaking up the spacing a little bit. And we can see it's added a nice extra little bit of spacing there in between it. We could also be doing stuff where we're overriding colors of things, a whole bunch of stuff like of that. We could also be having it that the selected object is drawn, at sort of one area, and then any of the other objects that are not selected are drawn separately. So lots of different things we could be doing there with this. You've got access to essentially all of the potential UI controls you can see there in Unity. So buttons, scroll fields, text labels. So you could be doing a search box there very easily, and so it's searching in the scene for particular ones. All of those different controls are available to us there that lets us set these up. So dive on in with stuff like editor windows. Think about use cases where you might want to be working with them. So they're particularly handy for stuff where you're wanting to see information from multiple sources at the one point in time, possibly be editing that information. So you could edit multiple sets of scriptable objects or prefabs or things like that there. Could be an interface for adjusting a database that you might have. Really handy for inspecting things at runtime where you've got a lot of different ones. So keep that in mind. A couple of things to make sure you watch out for. When we have stuff where we're doing like a begin, make sure you do an end. If you don't, you will get errors and it will get particularly grumpy at you. Be very careful about what information you have persist in your editor window. I very intentionally have it that the editor window, the only bit of information it's holding onto is this scroll position. It's not holding onto anything specific to an individual object. That gets stored in the object itself. The reason being that means then it's a lot safer and more reliable. the editor is not potentially going to hold on to something that would prevent an object being cleaned up, or that it might try to access something that's no longer there. Just stuff to watch for when you are working with it. But dive on in, see the kinds of things you can create with it. Thanks folks, I hope you found the video helpful. If you're looking for the code for the project, you'll find a link to it in the description below. As with all of the projects, you can use that code for any of your own projects, whether those are commercial or non-commercial. If you've got any questions, chuck in a comment below. If you want, submit them for the next Q&A video. If you found the video helpful, chuck in a like and subscribe. It's something that really helps out. It's really appreciated. And if you're looking for other ways to support the channel, then I do have a Patreon, and the link to that's in the description below as well. But until next time, bye.